I'm just gonna go out and say it. Arcane is what Korra could have been, and should have been. I know every fan's first reaction is to say, "How dare you compare these two works? They are incredibly different, don't you know? It's not a fair comparison, and you're a bad person. A very bad person." But they're not that different at all. In fact, they have the same exact elements, story beats, setting, and even some of the characters are almost a one-for-one equivalent to each other, except for a few crucial differences. But all the differences make the Arcane versions way better. Before I get into it, listen up. I'm only gonna say this once. I don't want this to be the Korra hating channel, so this will be my last Why Korra Bad video. You get what I'm saying? I don't want to complain for a living, or give the impression that Korra haunts my nightmares or something. People might be thinking I'm obsessed at this point. My goal with this video is to prove once and for all that Korra failed as a show because of the limitations in quality of the writing, not for any other reason. Not the strong female character, not the complex social commentary, none of that. Arcane proves once and for all that we were ready to love Korra, and we could have loved Korra because we love Arcane, who has all the same elements as Korra, down to the super aggressive fighting chick protagonist, but she doesn't bother us, while Korra does. Why? Let's find out. Arcane took me completely by surprise. I wasn't taking this show seriously at first, I gotta confess to you guys. I'd never thought I'd even watch it, much less like it. I only watched it because one of my friends who occasionally works on this channel wanted to make a video about it, because he's a massive League of Legends fan. So I felt like I had to be professional and see it for myself. I mean, what kind of degenerate would make an entire video about something he didn't even watch, huh? But to my surprise, I liked it a lot, more than I thought I would. This show is indeed a breath of fresh air in this day and age, for a whole host of reasons. The dynamic between the male and the female characters are great, and you don't feel any ridiculous battle of the sexes going on where the men are all stupid to make the ladies look good or whatever. Plenty of strong people from both sides. And these characters are first and foremost their own persons, with their own motivations and flaws, as well as virtues and strengths, which is all good storytelling. They also avoid the rich people evil trope, which is also refreshing. If I see one more piece of media made by rich capitalists telling me that capitalism is bad, I'm gonna lose my shit. I call a corporation making entertainment demonizing corporations the Ubisoft maneuver. No, Ubisoft, being self-aware doesn't excuse your crappy business practices. And lastly, what I like most about Arcane is that it proves that you can have a great story in a fantasy setting that everyone likes, that is extremely popular, but one that deals with complex social issues in a localized urban setting based on modern life. Arcane demonstrates how you can comment on current issues using fantasy without being horribly preachy or ideologically possessed. Successful fantasy stories don't have to only be escapist, is what I'm saying. Although escapism is good as well. There's a place for that, and there's a place for social commentary, and Arcane nails the social commentary. You never feel like they're taking one exact side or preaching to one ideology. There's a little something for everyone. Hey, Danke? Everything in Arcane takes place in a magical New York built on modern Enlightenment values of progress, industrial modernity, etc., which feels very close to home, unlike the usual far-off kingdoms or alien cultures that we normally encounter in fantasy stories, which is actually very rare that a story like Arcane becomes so popular in the mainstream. Usually, successful fantasy stories deal with very simple conflicts, such as evil rulers wanting to oppress the innocents, or when they are complex, they still have grand geopolitical strategies on a large scale. But something like Arcane, which is small scale, complex, and highly analogous to our own daily lives, is actually pretty rare as an extremely popular piece of entertainment loved by everyone. Not everyone deals with geopolitical intrigue and great leaders making big decisions, but we all have to deal with crime in our big cities. Right, Seth Rogen? Man, 15 times that a car got broken in. I live in Brazil, my car only got broken in twice. What the heck is going on in Los Angeles, man? Anyway, what Arcane is doing is similar to what Ruby did, I think, in some ways. But Ruby was never as popular as Arcane, as far as I can tell. And nobody even talks about Ruby anymore, so yeah, so that's what it is. It's interesting to note that Tolkien actually almost wrote something similar to Arcane as a Lord of the Rings sequel. He planned on having a focus on what happened in Minas Tirith after the War for the Ring, etc. But he decided that this particular cynical look at humanity didn't interest him. And this is what brings me to Korra, because Korra is also the other big example in pop culture that has the same exact setting and conflict as Arcane, especially in the first season. But despite Korra's loyal fanbase, it flopped. Many often forget that Korra got cancelled. Korra technically failed to reach any real popularity, especially during its runtime. And Korra is only really a thing now because everyone loved the show that preceded it. But Korra as a show itself has very little of its own steam. But Arcane isn't like this at all. Yeah, there's the League of Legends game, but Arcane doesn't need that thing to sustain itself. It brought millions of new fans into the world of Runeterra, including yours truly, maybe. I mean, I wouldn't call myself a fanboy, but I want to see what happens from here, especially after that cliffhanger at the end. I'm still probably not going to play the games though. I knew nothing of these characters going into this show. I mean, I had played League of Legends around 2 times in my life, a few years back, at a friend's house, around 7 to 8 years ago. And I remember all the raging 12-year-olds online going, "Noob Shin is feeding! Noob Shin is feeding!" And I had no clue what they were talking about. I was just trying to kill some little monsters. And yes, I was the noob. The only character I really knew anything about was Rise. Cause yeah, Rise was cool, but Rise doesn't really show up in Arcane. Unless this magic guy here is Rise, and I didn't even realize it. Oh, and Jinx. I knew Jinx. Because I saw her character in a music video once. Years ago. And like everyone else, I just wrote her off as a video game Harley Quinn. But this show was quite the experience. But you don't need me to tell you that it was good. Every other YouTuber is already saying it. What I wanted to discuss is the feeling that hit me almost immediately by the time I got to episode 4. Because that's when I realized that Arcane is Legend of Korra, but better. And Arcane is one of the best mainstream works of political commentary to come out from a big corporation of entertainment in the last 5 years or so. So how is Arcane like Korra? Well, in their respective first seasons, it's almost the same story, right? 1. It's a fantasy Manhattan-type city powered by magic. We barely see anything outside the city, apart from the first scenes in other cultural regions to give context to character backgrounds. 2. The setting is cosmopolitan and multicultural, involving characters from various different backgrounds, ethnicities, cultures, and social classes, etc., making our cast of characters diverse. And this diversity often feeds into the character conflicts present in the season, because the characters have to deal with their differences, though in Korra that's very poorly explored. 3. The city is a center of innovation and new technology that changes combat and social relations, giving a rise to a new type of elite, or an insurgent elite, that wants to replace the old elite. 4. It has an intense internal problem of inequality, which is so endemic to the social fabric of the city as to be an actual existential threat. 5. The city is run by a council who have been mismanaging the situation the whole time, leaving a giant mess for our main characters to have to deal with as they enter into the story. Kind of amazing that both Piltover and Republic City and Korra have basically the same exact government model, right? Little coincidences like this just really stood out for me. 6. The city we're stuck in for the season was founded with the lofty goal of heralding a new era beyond the traditions and historical baggage of the vast nations surrounding it. This city is one about progress, and it preaches equality between the diverse populations that inhabit it. But equality is something this city doesn't really live up to, which could be its undoing. 7. Both shows try to show that bad and good people exist on all sides of the issue, and it shows people reaching across the social divide to work together to solve the problems. Which is actually a point in favor I have with Korra, because Korra was responsible in its messaging, and also it had the cojones to criticize the excess of egalitarianism, which is brave on its part. Good work, Mike and Brian. That was pretty great actually, and I might do a video on that as something that I really like about Korra, especially in this era where people discuss the notion of equality of outcome versus equality of opportunity, etc. Korra does deserve praise for this. Here, Korra, have a cookie. Anyway. 8. The bad guy is an evil revolutionary who emerges from the neglected issues of the city like a ghost who emerges from the darkness to haunt the foundations of the city. He leads an army of devoted followers, has a dedicated lieutenant. Oh, and the bad guy is killed by a family member at the end, being all tragic and stuff because the behavior of the bad guy was his own undoing because the violence that he perpetuated stained his own relationship with the people related to him, and this got to him eventually. 9. The main character is a violent chick who's tough as nails and is quick to solve things by force and violence. She's an expert fighter, training from a very young age, and has a bit of a temper problem. She's impulsive, rude, sometimes downright hostile to those who challenge how she thinks, but despite her flaws, she's a natural leader, with a good heart, and is always willing to do the right thing, especially at the end there. She tries to be a hero when it counts. I could go on, bros, I really could, but I feel like you got the point already. Like I said, the setting is exactly the same, the main character herself is basically the same in everything but background, and the main conflict of the plot is the same. and the villain has the same goal of installing a new political order according to his ideals. Right? Same. But why does Arcane do it better than Korra? Well, I actually think it's for two reasons, really. Compared to Korra herself, Arcane's main character is way more understandable, likable, and genuinely heroic at times, despite her flaws. And secondly, Arcane spends its time much better than Korra, by always showing us scenes which are relevant to the story's conflict and plot, or the backgrounds and motivations of all the other key characters in the plot, allowing us as the viewers to get a deep look at these people, as well as the city of Piltover itself and its underbelly. Think about it. Every moment is spent showing us the inequality of the city and the situation, or some intimate moment with one of these characters. Never does Arcane waste our time with something as irrelevant as a random sporting event with no ties to the main conflict, or with a freaking love triangle stolen from the broken dreams of Stephanie Meyer. I have no problem with her, by the way. She just really milked that teen love drama. It's actually quite impressive. But one thing that always bothered me in Korra Season 1, where is the non-bender oppression? Where is it? Where is the institutional subjugation of the non-benders, man? We don't see any. It doesn't seem any easier for benders to get high-paying jobs or to live in the nicer area of the city. There's plenty of homeless and poor people who are benders, including two of our main characters, by the way. In fact, the richest person in the city is a non-bender who thinks he's oppressed. Oh. Is Korra actually genius commentary about the true state of first world society? I'm just kidding. But, I mean, Mike and Brian could have been commenting on how these different groups of benders and non-benders actually have a lot in common, and the bending and non-bending elites are actually exacerbating the conflict between these two identities for their own selfish power grab while they get the lower classes fighting each other. This would be a poignant message for our era. Or maybe they were talking about how many social issues are in fact an illusion, driven out of proportion by insane ideologues who then make everything worse by driving people into a frenzy with a highly exaggerated victim narrative, which isn't really true. But I doubt it. Chances are it's just bad writing, considering how they keep bringing up firebender crime violence who's killing everyone's parents apparently. Where are these firebenders coming from? And Tenzin talks like the non-benders are generally marginalized, and we see Unalaq bullying the non-benders in a way probably meant to show the plight of the non-benders, but that doesn't work because what Unalaq is doing is a reaction to equalist terrorism. It's not a systemic tendency of Republic City itself. It's a new social development. So it doesn't work because the non-benders didn't have the problem before, so how would that justify the equalists? Or at least explain their movement and their plight? None of what goes on in the first season of The Legend of Korra generally shows any real social problems between the benders and the non-benders. No institutional problem, at least, derived from a failure of society. Firebender criminals are not enough to showcase the deep social imbalance here, which is frustrating because there was a very easy way to do this. If The Legend of Korra wanted to show non-benders being slighted by society, they could have just exploited a very natural power imbalance between the benders and the non-benders, right? This is what they could have done. They could have showed us benders getting a fast-track career into the military or as high-ranking police officers, making basically all benders have an easy life option, complete with a cushy and privileged career just waiting for them. As a result, the benders are on average wealthier and live in the good part of town, and they dominate the infrastructure of the state, which makes them politically very influential, more than the percentage of their general population when compared to the non-benders. Because the benders are indispensable to the power of the state, which means they keep getting preferential treatment by the government and keep getting high pensions when they retire and have a fast track to healthcare treatment, and also they receive the best government schools for their kids, since the state has an interest in keeping these human weapons healthy and well trained and educated and comfortable, because they are the primary enforcers of the state. By comparison, the non-benders become mostly abandoned by the government, and they would have less access to privileged government careers, and mostly work as manual laborers, or at best as overworked pencil pushers and administrators, which would be more replaceable than the benders. And they get less investment, and have lower pensions and salaries. And if you still want the rich non-bender Henry Ford guy, you could have him demonstrate how non-benders have to be extra smart and full of gusto, and enter the private sector to thrive and pull themselves by their own bootstraps, because the government certainly won't help them, so they have to do it themselves, with good old-fashioned business savvy. But even then, these business tycoon non-benders get hampered with crippling taxes to pay for the cushy lives for all those high-ranking bender officers. But we don't see any of that in the show. There might be hints of what I said, but that's never really explored. And I know that we do see that non-benders feel intimidated by benders, who often take advantage of the weakness of non-benders by extorting them for money or whatever. But this is done by criminals in the show, and criminals are outside society. We don't see society itself being unjust to non-benders at all. Mako and Bolin's poverty ruins the whole idea that non-benders have it particularly bad. In fact, having benders be criminals kind of implies that they, the benders, are the marginalized ones, and they use bending force as a way to make money out of desperation. And having Mako and Bolin being forced to enter a gang to survive, that gang being the same one that Amon later accuses of oppressing non-benders, kind of implies that the gang is made up of poor and desperate benders. That society, in the Legend of Korra, is failing the benders and not the non-benders, if you think about it. Having the oppressive benders be mostly gangsters and mobsters was probably just a mistake by the writing staff because they wanted to make it more 1920s-esque, so you gotta bring Al Capone. But that ruins the entire message. You have to have the institutions of society doing the injustice, not whatever. If the Korra writers wanted to show that the non-benders had it bad, then what they should have done is show Mako and Bolin getting temporarily homeless as children because of the tragic death of their parents, and then in the streets they become friends with a fellow homeless child who is a non-bender. But once the government finds out that Mako and Bolin are benders, they swoop in to enroll the brothers into a fancy boarding school for bender children, preparing them to become military officers. But their homeless non-bender friend is left behind by the government, and maybe this kid then joins the Equalists because they offer him food and shelter, and he later becomes a fanatic under their training and tutelage. And this could have created an interesting conflict when Mako and Bolin have to face their old friend later on in the story. And the brothers and their friend are on opposite sides, and maybe they could have explored how life treated them differently. And they're on different sides politically, but they have to... I mean, who knows what they could have done, while not focusing on, I don't know, bending MMA or some crap. In the Korra show that we got, the Equalist movement just seems primarily motivated by envy, because they don't have magic powers, which is fine. It's not a bad motivation actually, but then that completely changes the social message, which was apparently what they were trying to say. I mean, an evil organization motivated by envy would be a poignant message. Envy politics can be a problem, but here it's to the point where I have no clue what Korra is trying to say. Either it's doing some insane four-dimensional commentary chess thing so controversial in our era that it would make Twitter explode with the hellish rage of the inferno, or it's just mired in bad writing, which completely ruins what they were really trying to say. Whatever the case, in Korra, the social commentary in Arcane is actually way better. For two simple reasons. Their point is clear, yet mature and nuanced. They could have easily gone the rich people bad route, or taken the other side. And I thought they were going to take a side by a second then, but they completely blew away my expectations. In Arcane, we actually see the problems of the city. We're not just told of the problems. It's in the aesthetics, the lighting, the clothing the different characters wear, the type of places they live, and their own personal conflicts and personalities which are shaped by the environments they come from. Like the character Victor, who used to live in Zon, the poor area, and now he has a crippling disease because of overexposure to toxic air, which is common from where he's from. And this condition which he carries for his whole life is a huge part of his motivation, and his character background, and the conflict he has, and the plot. Everything is connected to the conflict at hand. And we also see diverse backgrounds of every character, and these backgrounds are well developed, and we see the rising social conflict in Piltover through many different angles, through the perspectives of these characters that we come to love, which means that we start seeing this conflict through many different points of view. And it's not just one narrative, it's not just one thing that the show is preaching to us. We have to actually address reality from many different angles and understand that things are complicated. And each of the different characters are trying to solve the issues in a way that they seem to understand, and a lot of them don't understand the full picture. And we get the sense that the key to make things better is just to step back and try to see all the different moving parts, and not just have one ideological view of things. It's a very interesting thing that the show is doing. Also, the characters are more than a simple stereotype, right? You have more than just the rich girl, or the evil henchman, or the bad guy, which is the case in Korra. Although Asami does get more of a development later on, but in the first season she really is just the rich girl. The Arcane characters are incredible because the show is doing two things, which is actually very rare for a story. One, they present the characters in such a way that they are their own persons with their own particular interests and motivations and their own natures, to the point that they feel like real people. Yet, at the same time, they do two. They make these characters archetypes that represent different demographics in the real world that are involved with the real social issues that they're commenting on. And what is amazing is that any one of us, audience members, could be represented by one of these characters or archetypes, because any one of us could be part of one of the demographics that they're portraying in the show. I myself fall into a demographic portrayed by one of the characters. Kudos if you guys can guess down in the comments which one. But here, let's look at these characters and what they represent. Jace. Jace represents the new tech elite who creates new inventions that make him become a new member of the elite, because he becomes indispensable to the new infrastructure of the state through his mastery of technology, which means that he has to become one of the elites of the state. Is it any wonder that Riot Games portrays this guy as so heroic? It couldn't be, because the Riot Games guys themselves are part of this young, rich, new tech elite, right? It's okay, I'm not judging. I like Jace, he's one of my favorite characters in the show. But yeah, it's no coincidence that he's such a good guy. He represents the demographic that the people behind the show are a part of. Rich tech guys. Almost a hero fantasy for them, but it's fine. Who doesn't want to be a hero? Also, Echo. Echo represents the heroic young person from an impoverished background who seeks to help his community, but he is not a revolutionary type because he is motivated by his love for the people of his community and not hatred for the privileged. So he just focuses on making things better and not getting back at the system. Mel and Caitlin. Mel and Caitlin are the rich young people with good hearts who want to use their positions to help others. But Caitlin also represents the type of rich person who is ashamed of their comfortable life and seek to face the pain head-on in their career type or their life choices in order to get in touch with the real world and with people from unfortunate backgrounds and see how they live. People like Caitlin want to deal with reality by escaping their own comfortable bubbles. While Mel is different. She's part of that rich elite, which is from a brutal family, and she seeks to be more gentle and soft-hearted. So yeah, Caitlin and Mel, two different rich girls from two different types of elite. Caitlin is from the bourgeois rich elite. Mel is from the more violent warrior class type elite, or dictatorial elite, right? By the way, Mel is my favorite character. I don't have waifus, because I'm not a degenerate, but if I did engage in waifusing of cartoon characters, well, let's just say Jace is a lucky bastard. Alright, Heimdegger. Is that his name? The little teddy bear? He represents the old elite with the well-intentioned, old-timey values, but he's out of touch. Silco. Silco represents the crime lord and the revolutionary, who are often one and the same in real life. Just ask the guys in the FARC in Colombia, or the Comando Vermelho in Rio de Janeiro. Silco preaches high ideals, but he's actually making everything worse in his own community that he pretends to be serving by spreading violence and crime. Fun fact, guys, crime actually hurts poor people the most, as the show itself reveals. The rich can make do with private security, and crime mostly gets in the way of people from these poor communities and prevents them from starting their own businesses, which makes them even poorer. Anyway, Victor. Victor represents the guy from poor origins who rises to the top with his brilliance and hard work. And Jinx? Everybody's crazy ex-girlfriend! I'm kidding. I'll talk more about her and other characters in another video, maybe, depending on how well this one does. By the way, did I mention that Mel's my favorite character? Her, Jace, Victor, and Vander are my favorite characters. As for Vi is interesting. She represents the person from the hard part of society who comes to hate crime for the damage that it's doing to their own communities, and they tend to join the police precisely to help clean things up. Vi represents some of the heroic types from tough backgrounds who come to see the criminals festering in the underworld as the real problem of their communities. And so working with the enforcers is a way that Vi finds to root out the criminals in an attempt to make her poor community stable for a legitimate business, as well as helping them have a peaceful life. Kind of like what Echo is doing, though Echo is the community leader type. I don't want to get any more political than I already have been, so I won't say much more. But defunding the enforcers would not improve things in Zon. I'm just saying. I like Vi, even if she's very much the Korra of Arcane. She pretty much is the equivalent of Korra, in many ways, if you think about it. There are differences, sure. Vi isn't the chosen one, for instance, and she's not privileged like Korra. The latter is basically royalty, considering who her father and her uncle are, and she's also pampered by a secret cabal of mystics, because she's the Avatar. Meanwhile, Vi grew up in a toxic favela, where the air alone gives you lung cancer. But in personality, fighting style, personal ethos, ideals, and being the protagonist, Vi is basically like Korra, but much better, and more likable. Except she has a worse haircut! The background differences make all the difference, because people, myself included, complain endlessly about Korra's attitude and her behavior, but no one really complains about Vi. Why? Why Vi? Why no cry by Vi? Vi no sly. That why. My point is, we all understand where Vi is coming from, and we feel her pain. She's harsh, rude, aggressive, quick to go out alone. She doesn't work well with others. She's bossy, has difficulty with authority. She's always wanting to be the alpha and put other people down. But we like her because we know where she's coming from. She's the way she is because she comes from a harsh background. She's a tough girl from a tough place, and she's trying to survive. She's seen her friends die when she was very young, and she's gone hungry from time to time. She wants to protect her family, and her love towards her family tends to trigger her mama lion instincts. But the point is, she has reason for her behavior. Clear and understandable reasons. Sympathetic reasons. Why in the world is Korra the way she is? Who peed in her noodles, you know what I'm saying? Characters like her are better off humble, like Caitlyn, or gentle, like Mel. If you want to have a privileged character be like Korra, and be the protagonist at the same time, so that she can grow out of it, you better have her improved by the first season. Because if this carries on until the rest of the seasons, heaven help me, man, I'm gonna lose my... Anyway, to reiterate what I've said before, Arcane's immense popularity proves that people were ready to love Korra. Korra fans have less arguments now. Arcane has everything Korra had, and no one is complaining about Arcane, which means that Korra fans don't have an easy excuse anymore. Oh, you just don't like grounded and gritty political thrillers. No, that's Arcane. Oh, you just can't handle all that empowered estrogen. No, that's Arcane. It's the writing, my friends. Korra had bad writing. It's just the writing. But it's okay to like Korra, guys. I like a few things in that show, which I might talk about one day, like I said. Anyway, it is important to note that Vi does have her selfish moments like Korra, and she's not exactly pristine morally. She's callous with the lives of others, even children, and she's too quick to violence. But of course, because she's not as wise as Best Girl over here. But she does have a heroic and selfless moment in the first act, when she's willing to give herself up to de-escalate things with the enforcers, who are basically looking for whoever stole the equivalent of enriched uranium. So you can bet that things are getting tense with the fuzz, right? But Vi is willing to give herself up and make up for her mistake, despite her hot-headedness and anger issues. I don't recall Korra doing something similar. She just gets captured. But anyway, yeah, Korra and Arcane are shows that basically are very similar. They even have small details that be the same, like how both cities in the setting have a council as the main executive body, but the council is way more developed in Arcane. In Korra, I can't tell what the heck is going on. Who are these idiots in the background? How the heck does the council work? Who cares, right? Let's go back to watching sports, or that ridiculous love drama. Teen romance, there's nothing more terrible than that. While in Arcane, we know that the council is run by the captains of different economic sectors, and Jace invents an entirely new sector of the economy, so he becomes a council member. We also get to know some of the douchebags in this government body, and we understand that Piltover is a corporatocratic oligarchy, And Zahn works much the same way, but the oligarchic business tycoons in charge are actually mafia bosses who run the crime empires. But Zahn and Piltover, they mirror each other, which is interesting. And Silco benefits from the inequality of his own system, of which he is the undisputed leader. And it's in his interest to keep people below him addicted to toxic substances, which makes him a giant frickin' hypocrite when he talks about, oh, the Piltover, they hate people of Zahn. So do you, buddy. So do you. And it's funny how the violent chaos he nurtures, represented by Jinx herself, gets him killed. This is typical for revolutionary types, by the way. They get devoured by their own chaos. But as bad as Silco is, Piltover, or Topside, as it's called sometimes, is indeed a decadent, degenerate environment filled with spoiled, selfish, out-of-touch a-holes who are indeed failing the poor and downtrodden people of Zahn, while satisfying their own disgusting hedonism. And the people they could help are suffering immensely in neglect. But it's good that we see this old elite getting replaced with a new one, which is happening in the show. But it is tragic that Heimdegger is the one who's replaced and not that other douchebag over there. Heimdegger is fine, just a little out of touch, but then he starts to see how people in Zahn are living poorly and probably will do things better. I like him. Sad that Jace felt that he had to... Anyway, I'm getting off track. Anyway, Victor and Caitlyn should also replace some of those council members. Also, did I mention that Mel is best girl? What can I say? I have a thing for classy ladies. But yeah, the social commentary in Arcane is quite complex, and there is no clear solution. The problem stems from reality itself and how it works, and the characters who are in conflict with each other are mostly reacting to the situation around them, which leads to several different tragedies. In comparison with Korra, when Amon is defeated, out of nowhere, the equalist movement just dies, making the whole political message and the grievances in the show operate on video game logic. Oh, you killed the final boss! Yay, everything is solved! But no, that cheapens the entire plot of the show and makes the conflict seem too light with no real gravity. In Arcane, when the big villain dies, the chaos he unleashes rages on, threatening to destroy everything, which will test the virtues of our heroes later on in Season 2, and they're already under considerable strain. But this just adds to the gravitas of what we're witnessing, and it makes us feel like what we're watching has real value, because the world is more like this. There's no final boss that you can defeat. The problem is in ourselves. However, one thing I have to admit is that despite all the differences between The Legend of Korra and Arcane, they do take a similar position in the messaging. Both shows are critical of the revolutionary sentiments, and both shows are pro-reform, which is based and reason-pilled. Even if it angers some YouTube armchair revolutionaries who might be promoting revolutions from their platforms. I don't know, that seems to be the implications of what some of the things they're saying when they complain about Korra or Arcane being too centrist. But we have plenty of historical data to know that Korra and Arcane are actually just being responsible in their messaging. Most revolutions in history, from Russia to China to France, have ended badly, causing terrible instability. France is in its 5th republic for a reason. And a lot of people don't know this, but modern terrorism as a concept and practice was developed by French secular revolutionaries. That's right, it's associated with religious extremism now, but it was pioneered by the Jacobin pro-equality types. But yeah, what Arcane seems to understand, as well as Korra, for all its faults as a story, is that revolutions usually don't work in creating true freedom and a better peaceful society, for very natural reasons. Reasons which are derived from the very origins and function of the revolution. Revolutions create violent extremists and militarize the would-be reformers, and they would turn the would-be reformers into a military organization which is by definition one that centralizes authority and power under a hierarchy based on violence, which makes it doubly ironic if the revolution is based on universal equality. Yes, Supreme Comrade, we will march under your orders for equality. These revolutions empower the most violent and savage political extremists, necessarily. Extremists who will always rise to the top during the violent chaos they often cause themselves. And once this militarized force takes over and they get power over society, they tend to keep their militarized system of political violence and they keep using it because all they know is violence. And they have no incentive to stop using it because it served them well until now, right? They got the power, right? So they keep using violence because their victory rewarded their violence. And if it worked to remove their opponents, then why should they stop using it? In almost every single case, revolutionaries turn on the general population with their violence after taking over, or on each other, and they institute mass purges, executions, etc. George Washington types who give up their violent power voluntarily in the name of a peaceful transition of power, they are unicorns in human history. That's what makes them so admirable, because they're rare. With all this being said, despite all my whining, Mike and Brian are great storytellers who made one of the best animated series of all time in Avatar: The Last Airbender. And I, and most of us, cannot touch their feet as writers or content creators ourselves. But knowing where these giants went wrong will help us, the little people, know where to tread in our own storytelling journeys. Also, I wrote a book once and nobody cared about that, not enough to even complain about the thing. So having an autistic idiot like myself complaining about your show all the time is still a sign of incredible success for your story, guys. Being ignored is the worst criticism, right? But seriously, Mike and Brian should be proud of what they accomplished, especially since Korra has some good elements as well. Thank you all for listening to my ramblings. Have a good day, my friends.